Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakak Wadash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into Ezekiel, the 31st chapter. Okay, and as we go through this chapter, there's certain, the way it's worded, it's in a sort of a metaphorical / dark saying, where not every part in this is actually literal. Okay, but as we go through, Lord willing, it be edifying and clear to the elect. So this is the book of Ezekiel, chapter 31, verse 1. Now, as we read in Ezekiel, the 30th chapter, the Lord was pretty much pronouncing judgment, speaking against Pharaoh, Egypt. Okay, and as we keep on reading in here, it's sort of a continuation of that. But as we read through, you'll notice that there are certain parts in this chapter, certain verses, which just like in other certain chapters as well, or can be applicable to in a prophetic sense. Okay, so let's go through this. This is the book of Ezekiel 31, verse 1. And it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with fair branches, and with a shadowing shrewd, and of an high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. Okay, so as it begins, Ezekiel is the Lord is telling Ezekiel to speak unto Pharaoh, right? Or prophesy against Pharaoh. Basically, as it says in verse 3, it first compares him to like the Assyrians, right? He's speaking now about the Assyrians, and he's saying, take a look, like these Assyrians, when they were in power, and it likens them onto this cedar in Lebanon, right? Because we know that Lebanon was known for their cedar, cedar trees. So as we read through this chapter, it's likening these different nations onto trees. Okay, it's not talking about actual literal trees, but it's a metaphorical way of speaking about these nations. Okay, so when it talks about the Assyrian being a cedar in Lebanon, with fair branches and with a shadowing shrewd, meaning that it was a good-looking cedar, which was a nice tall, casted a large shadow. Like if you walked into a forest and you saw this super huge tree. It says, and of an high stature, so it was tall, and his top was among the thick boughs, because it was tall, it had height. Now what this is representing is the characteristics, or the size of the Assyrian Empire, the state, the condition that they were in. Okay, so the Lord is basically saying here, just like the Assyrians, once upon a time were in this high position, likened onto a cedar tree in Lebanon that was fair, and so on and so forth. It says, the waters made him great, the deep set him up on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers onto all the trees in the field. Okay, so it's talking about these trees in Lebanon. Once again, it's comparing this nation or these nations onto these trees. Verse 5, therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long because of the multitude of waters when he shot forth. So as they continued to grow, they started to expand, they started to become huge, like as if a tree, that is given sufficient water and obviously sunlight and so on and so forth, placed in a good, rich soil and good environment, it can grow and expand. That's how the Lord is likening the Assyrians. But keep in mind that at this point that Ezekiel is prophesying this, the kingdom of Assyria had already fallen, right? Because they had fallen to the Babylonians. All right, the Babylonians basically, with help of the Medes and the Scythians, had taken them down. Okay, so all the Lord is doing here is he's just making a point to Pharaoh. Verse 6, all the fowls of heaven made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwell all great nations. And what that basically means is this kingdom had a great dominion, right? Actually, when you go to the book of Daniel, the 4th chapter, Nebuchadnezzar was also described in a similar way, where he was likened onto a tree. Okay, there we go. This is and this was in a dream that he had, right, which Daniel interpreted and explained to him. Now, this is the book of Daniel, chapter 4, verse 18. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof. For as much as the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. Then Daniel, whose name was, actually, let me just come down to the point. All right, verse 20. So Daniel goes on to explain this dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 20, the tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, thou art grown, become strong, for thy greatness is grown, and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. Right? So, being that Nebuchadnezzar was the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, this tree that he dreamed about was representing basically his empire, with him ruling over it. Okay, and it was likened onto this fair tree with the beasts of the field dwelling under it, and the fowls of heaven dwelling under the branches. So that's how the Assyrian Empire was being described here. Okay, in their great dominion that they once had. And that's why it's mentioning about the fowls making their nest in his bowls and all of that. That just represents these other nations that were subject or under the dominion of this particular nation here. Okay. Verse 7. Thus was he fair in his greatness, in the length of his branches, for his root was by great waters. Okay, so just like a tree that's planted by water, and it has a good resources and minerals, it'll grow to be a very strong and good looking tree. Now, when we get to verse 8 and 9, keep in mind that though on the surface level, this is Ezekiel prophesying to Pharaoh or against Pharaoh. And when I say that, I don't mean that he is in Egypt in the presence of Pharaoh, but he is speaking these words concerning Pharaoh as the Lord told him to. And he starts off by making a comparison and to Assyria, how once upon a time they were this great empire, right? This tall empire likened onto this good looking cedar tree. That's basically what we read of on the surface level. Now, when you get to verse 8 and 9, there's an actual deeper meaning. Okay, in verse 8 and 9, when it starts to talk about the garden of God, it's really talking about the time of Adam, okay, and the sons of God, as we're going to go through. Okay, and this is why, as we make mention of, really the Spirit of the Lord has to be working with you for you to understand these scriptures, because similar to precepts like Revelation the 12th chapter and Revelation the 20th chapter and different other precepts, as you read through, there are certain verses that may be tied together relating to one particular point, and then you might hit the very next verse and it's really dealing with another subject matter, but then it continues on maybe a couple verses later with the original subject matter, and you need to be able to identify and understand these different jumps, okay, or meanings in the scriptures. which is why it makes it so difficult for these modern day scholars to try and understand it. But this is Ezekiel 31:8. It says here, the cedars in the garden of God could not hide him. So now what or where was the garden of God? Remember, when you read back in the book of Genesis, it tells you about how the Lord God basically had made a garden, had planted a garden eastward in Eden, which Eden was the earth. The whole earth was called Eden, which is a paradise. Okay, and the eastward in Eden is where we know today that region of Israel, or the Levant, or really Jerusalem. Okay, which is why there's a precept that refers to Jerusalem as the mother of us all. Right, so the garden, okay, now we're dealing with the garden, as it says here, the cedars in the garden of God could not hide him, and the him here being Adam. Okay, and why was this? Because when you go back to the book of Genesis, there was a when Adam had gone off after having given heed to his wife Eve, they try to basically hide themselves, okay, amongst these nations. But because they were so different, all right, designed differently, that wasn't the case. They weren't able to do so. Okay, so as it says here, the fir trees were not like his boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like his branches. Right, so that's like, taking one tree that's drastically different than the others and trying to blend it with the others. It's gonna easily stand out. Okay, which was the case for Adam, because the sons of God are different. Okay, and in a higher sense than these other nations, which that point is also reiterated here in the book of Deuteronomy. Let's go Deuteronomy 7:6. Let's get that real quick. All right, now this is the book of Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 6, and this is dealing with the nation of Israel. So as it reads, for thou art an holy people, right? Holy meaning separate and sanctified, a holy people unto the Lord Yahweh thy power. The Lord Yahweh thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Okay, so keep in mind that though going back to the garden, the Israelites were not referred to as Israelites or children of Israel, because that name was later on given to Jacob. Okay, however, the sons of God are the same spirits that later on came to be classified as the Israelites. Okay, so just as we read of here, saying the Lord said that they are, or at least Moses was saying this, but that they are a special people, right, above all people that are upon the face of the earth, because the Israelites were made different. The sons of God were made different than the rest of these nations, which is why, going back to the 8th chapter, the 8th verse here in Ezekiel 31, that's why these other trees were not like, right, the boughs or the branches of the sons of God, okay, namely Adam. Nor any tree in the garden of God was like unto him in his beauty. Right? Now, like I said, you may have an individual that may be reading this and say, well, it starts off talking about Assyria. Okay, how come here in this verse it's not just continuing to talk about Assyria? Well, keep in mind, right, if you go back to the garden of God, and as we just read, the Israelites were above, okay, all these other nations. The sons of God were above the rest of the heathen nations that were in the garden. Would it make sense that the Assyrians, which are heathens, would be more beautiful than the sons of God? Okay, as it says here, there's no other tree that was like unto him in his beauty. All right, so keep going in verse 9. I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of God, right, which these trees represent these different nations. Okay, so all the different nations that were there, as it says, envied him. Okay, envied who? The sons of God. Okay, i.e. Adam. Now, one particular of these trees envied him so much, okay, that through that envy, he caused them to go off. Okay, which we're gonna get that here in the book of Wisdom of Solomon. Second chapter. All right, now this is the book of Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 23. For God created man to be immortal and made him an image of his own eternity. Now here it's really specifically talking about the sons of God. Okay, they were the ones that were created to be immortal, okay, to be an image of the Most High's own eternity. All right, but verse 24, nevertheless, through envy of the devil came death into the world, and they that do hold of his side do find it. So because of the envy of the devil, which the devil in the garden obviously was known as a serpent, but the serpent wasn't an actual snake. Okay, the serpent was, if we go according to the analogy in Ezekiel the 31st chapter, the serpent was one of these trees, i.e. one of these nations, which later on in time in history later came to be known as the Edomites. Okay, they are the ones referred to here as the devil, because the word devil means the deceiver. So they deceived the sons of God. They deceived Adam, but really it started with Eve. And how did that bring death into the world? Well, the scriptures tell you that the wages of sin is death. Okay, and sin is the transgression of the law. So they caused this devil caused, okay, the sons of God to transgress, and through that, right, they found death. They basically they were basically subject, okay, onto death as that punishment. So coming back to Ezekiel 31:9, as we read about how all the trees envied him, one in particular's envy was so great that he ended up deceiving them. Okay, now when we get to verse 10, it basically jumps down, or it basically goes back to continuing the prophecy against Egypt, okay, or against Pharaoh. And as I said, as we keep on going through, there's some of these verses that, yes, this is being mentioned against Pharaoh, some of these verses are applicable to the modern day Egypt or the modern day Pharaoh. So verse 10, therefore thus saith the Lord Yahweh, because thou hast lifted up thyself in height. Okay, so it's dealing with Pharaoh, lifted up thyself in height, and hath shot up his top among the thick boughs, and his height, or his heart, is lifted up in his height, meaning that because, like, as they started to grow and you know, gain dominion, they became proud. When it talks about your heart being lifted up, it means you become proud. Okay, and your heart meaning going back to the Hebrew word lab, which means your mind. When you have when your mind, basically you have a big head, okay, it means you become proud or lofty. So as they started to grow, they became proud. It says here, I have therefore delivered him into the hand of the mighty one of the heathen, okay, the meaning a mighty nation. And as we read in the previous chapter, this was the Babylonians, right, that the Lord delivered the Egyptians into their hand. Now, when they actually came over and when they took them over, they obviously their cities were overrun, you know, for a period of time. But eventually they recovered from that, but they were just never the same. So it says here, he shall surely deal with him. I have driven him out for his wickedness. And strangers, the terrible of the nations, have cut him off, and have left him upon the mountains, and in all the valleys his branches are fallen, and his boughs are broken by the rivers of the land. And all the people of the earth are gone down from his shadow and have left him. So basically they lost that dominion, okay, having been brought down to this lower state. That's basically what the representation of the branches falling and the boughs being broken, meaning they lost that power and that dominion. Okay, which is also, I mean, going to happen to this modern day Egypt as well, right? It says here, upon his, and when I say the modern day Egypt, I'm referring to America, right? When you read precepts like 2nd Ezra, the 15th chapter, in the beginning verses, when it talks about Egypt, is referring to America, right? And even in the book of Revelation, the 11th chapter, right around the 8th verse, it likens, it calls basically America, right, which is that great city, spiritual Sodom and Egypt. All right, because there are a lot of similarities between this land and Egypt. And even in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter and the 68th verse, that Egypt that we were going to be brought to, okay, by way of ships, was talking about America. Verse 13, upon his ruin shall all the fowls of the heaven remain, and all the beasts of the field shall be upon his branches. Okay, once again, just emphasizing the point of them being brought down, okay, into losing that high stature, as we read a couple verses above, that high state, and being brought down to this low state, right, the ruin. Verse 14, to the end that none of the trees by the waters exalt themselves for their height. So why is the Lord going to do this? So that these other trees, these other nations can see, right, this Egypt will be made an example, okay, that these other nations may see, not to exalt themselves, okay, not to be proud. As it says here, neither shoot up their top among the thick boughs, metaphorical way of saying the same thing. Neither their trees stand up in their height, all that drink water, right? Because when obviously likening these nations onto a tree needs water to survive, okay? For they are all delivered unto death, to the nether parts of the earth. Meaning, yeah, they're all subject onto death, and they're all pretty much gonna be brought down, okay, just as Egypt was, or just as Pharaoh was, to the nether parts of the earth, which the nether parts of the earth in a literal sense is the grave, right? That's why you get the term like 6 feet under. They're talking about the grave. In the midst of the children of men, which the children of men are these other nations. It's another classification or representation of these other nations. With them that go down to the pit, okay, meaning once again down to the grave. Now, keep in mind that as this is being pronounced against Pharaoh, this is also going to happen to the modern day Pharaoh or the modern day Egypt, right? They're also going to be brought down, okay, and that's going to be an example onto the world as they witness the downfall of this place as well. Okay, and I believe when you even read in the book of Isaiah, I believe it's Isaiah the 24th chapter, it talks about them being brought down to the sides of the pit. Okay, verse 15, it says, "Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, in the day when he went down to the grave, I caused a mourning." Right, so when they were brought down, when they were basically taken out of power, destroyed, I caused a mourning. I covered the deep for him, and I restrained the floods thereof, and the great waters were stayed. And I caused Lebanon to mourn for him, and all the trees of the field fainted for him. Now, remember that this is written in a metaphorical way. So just because it's saying here that the Lord, the Lord is saying that he caused mourning and covered the deep, basically performed all these feats at the instance of the fall of Pharaoh, it doesn't attribute any special treatment to Pharaoh. Okay, it's just to put emphasis on their downfall. Okay, and just like it says here, that all the trees of the field fainted for him, right? All those other nations, okay, fainted for him, especially those that were allied onto him. Now, in ancient Egypt, when Egypt was, going through this judgment, those nations that were allied, like we read in the previous chapter, right, in Ezekiel 30, they basically quote unquote fainted for him, right? Because they were also subject to that captivity, okay, and they were also at a loss. Okay, now when this modern day Egypt goes down, guess what? These nations are also going to faint for him. Verse 16, I made the nations to shake at the sound of his fall. Now, when you look into the word shake, it actually goes into with fear. Okay, at the sound of his fall, when I cast him down to hell with them that descend into the pit. Okay, now hell, when you deal with hell, in here and really in all instances of the scriptures, when it talks about hell, it's not talking about the hell that is taught in Christian dogma, for example, where they tell you that it's a place where you go to after you die if you've been bad, and you go and burn there for all of eternity. Okay, that place doesn't exist. When it talks about hell, there are two meanings. Okay, hell can be a representation of a harsh, low, or terrible condition that you are in, or it can be it can represent the grave. Okay, meaning you're where you die. Being brought down to hell can be a representation of that. Okay, but mainly it depends on the context as well. So as it says, yeah, I made the nations to shake at the sound of his fall. Now, when this happened in the past, okay, the nations, particularly the ones that were dependent on Egypt, felt this. Okay, but once again, if you think about this in a prophetic sense, right, in applying it to modern day Egypt, when this modern day Egypt falls, these nations are going to shake at that sound. Okay, they're going to be astonished. They're going to be surprised at the fall of this place. Okay, and it even tells you that some of them are going to mourn because they're not going to be able to make that merchandise off of modern day Egypt anymore. Right, when I cast them down to hell with them that descend into the pit, right, because those that descend into the pit are dead, and that hell being in the grave. Okay, but in this case, it means that they're going to be brought down to a low state. And all the trees of Eden, the choice and the best of Lebanon, all that drink water, shall be comforted in the nether parts of the earth. And why is that? Because they're going to, like if you, in this sense, when modern day Egypt goes down, for example, they're going to be comforted knowing that the oppressor has ceased. Okay, and in Isaiah 14, as you read that chapter, that also goes into that as well. Because like I explained earlier, these trees are not talking about actual literal trees. Okay, this is a representation of these nations. Verse 17, they also went down into hell with him, unto them that be slain with the sword. Because when this place goes down, okay, back then when Egypt went down, Ethiopia, the other nations that were listed in there in Ezekiel the 30th chapter, they also got taken down, right? They also got overrun. All right, and applying it now, when modern day Egypt goes down, gets brought down to that lower state, guess what? These other trees of Eden, these other nations, they're also going to be brought down, okay, to this hellish condition of captivity, of servitude. Now here, it doesn't mean that they're all going to be brought down to the grave as in to die, because if that was the case, then every nation would really be dead, and that's not according to prophecy, right? That doesn't line up with prophecy. It says here, and they that were his arm, right, those that were his allies, that dwelt under his shadow in the midst of the heathen, right? They were allied, they were under his dominion, right? I either shared the dominion or under his dominion. They are also going to be brought down to a low state once this place goes down. Verse 18, it says, to whom art thou thus like in glory and in greatness among the trees of Eden? Which is just another way of saying like you were pretty much, next to no one, with the state or the condition you were in compared to these other nations. Yet shalt thou be brought down with the trees of Eden onto the nether parts of the earth. So yet you still gonna be brought down to a low state, just like the rest of them. Thou shalt lie in the midst of the uncircumcised with them, which the uncircumcised are these heathens, these other nations, because circumcision was an ordinance that was only given to the Israelites. With them that be slain by the sword. This is Pharaoh and all his multitude, saith the Lord Yahweh. Okay, and that's pretty much the end of Ezekiel the 31st chapter. And like I said, as you read through some of these chapters here, it's important to be able to understand which parts, because there are certain verses that have happened, historically. Okay, and I'm not talking just specifically about Ezekiel 31, but generally speaking, there are certain verses and certain chapters in the scriptures that are dealing solely historically, okay, Like if you take, for example, Daniel 11 or Second Esdras, the 11th chapter, like some of these chapters here, they mainly have already happened, right? They're dealing with a time specifically in history. Okay, but there are also certain chapters that deal with both history and prophecy, you know, and when you read certain verses, though they may have happened in time past, they can also be applied to the present time or thought of in a prophetic sense. Okay, and then there are also those verses where, like Daniel the 8th chapter, where it talks about through his policy or through his law, he shall cause craft to prosper. I think that's Daniel 8 and 25 or so, where it's talking about a time past, you know, during the time of Antiochus. But sometimes you may make a point using that precept to relate to a time today, in which when you do so, you have to qualify the precept by letting it be known that, hey, this is actually talking about X, Y, and Z. Okay, but when you look at the state or the condition today, it can be applied, you know, to, you know, Esau, Edom today, for example. Okay, so the whole point being, you know, some of these verses as you read in here, they are talking about times that have happened before. Okay, but some of them are also applicable, you know, when it comes to certain types of judgments in a prophetic sense. So, Lord willing, that was clear and edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Brachak, Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.